The records I have recently catalogued, designated under Municipal Archive Code NBR 427, pertain to a suburban neighborhood that has since become the subject of extensive inquiry and cautious avoidance by local authorities. Situated within the city's Midwestern jurisdiction, the neighborhood, referred to in the archives only as Greenfield Estates, was documented as fully active and inhabited across all government departments for a period beginning in the late 1990s and extending into the early 2010s. The materials recovered from a condemned county records depot include a range of civic documents, utility service logs, police welfare check reports, school attendance records, property tax files, city planning revisions, and various communications between municipal offices. At first glance, the archive presents itself as a standard municipal file, delineating the life cycle of a modest suburban development. However, upon closer examination, several incongruities arise. The most immediate anomaly is that despite all municipal systems indicating continuous occupation, physical verification of residence repeatedly failed. Police welfare checks documented in the files consistently report vacant interiors with no signs of inhabitants. Yet, the utility logs show uninterrupted consumption of water, gas, and electricity. Property tax payments were made without interruption, and school records list enrolled children with regular attendance. These contradictions mark the archive with a persistent tension between official record and observable reality. The neighborhood's geographic indexing within municipal GIS layers also reveals irregularities. Street numbers, parcel boundaries, and building outlines show minor but recurring discrepancies across successive versions of city planning maps. The numbering of homes occasionally duplicates, and the parcel identification codes are sometimes reassigned in conflicting ways. Cross-referencing these anomalies with census data held in Vault 15's demographic variance files reveals partial overlaps, though demographic anomalies related to Greenfield Estates were not catalogued in those files, suggesting a selective or partial record-keeping at the time. The timeline of the archive's documents begins with routine municipal monitoring reports, which include standard utility meter readings and annual property tax assessments. These early entries show no irregularities. However, welfare checks initiated after a brief period of citizen-reported absence begin to note the first signs of inconsistency. Recorded observations describe homes as fully furnished and maintained, with appliances and utilities in working order, but without any human presence detected. The welfare reports contain entries such as no response to door knocks, no vehicles present, alongside subsequent notes of no signs of forced entry or abandonment. These reports stand in contrast to utility bills, which reflect patterns consistent with active, daily residential use. School district records remain particularly perplexing. Enrollment rosters for Greenfield Estates identify multiple children assigned to local public schools. Attendance is marked as regular, often corroborated by bus route logs that indicate stops within the neighborhood. Yet, no staff or drivers in the reports, recall seeing any children boarding buses or entering schools from this area. Occasional parent-teacher conference notes contain brief, unexplained references to absent guardians or unreachable contacts. But these notations do not halt the formal enrollment or attendance processes. The municipal archive also includes minutes from homeowners association meetings held in the early 2000s. These minutes initially reflect typical concerns and communal decisions. After a certain point, the minutes increasingly reference attempts to contact neighbors who remain unresponsive, with no resolution. The minutes detail discussions about maintenance and security, with particular attention given to the synchronization of porch lighting and garden upkeep, which were reportedly controlled remotely during scheduled times. These entries imply a level of orchestration that exceeds typical resident involvement. A crucial artifact within the archive is a city planner's memorandum submitted during a period of heightened scrutiny. The document references a concept termed structural exchange, though the exact meaning remains vague and undefined within the context of the archive. The planner's language hints at a process whereby the neighborhood's identity and occupancy might have been altered or replaced without disruption to municipal systems. Notably, the planner resigns shortly after submitting this memorandum, and subsequent city council records contain only brief, procedural mentions of the issue, with a clear directive to maintain operational status and limit external inquiry. Later entries in the archive reveal escalating contradictions. Security camera summaries from the neighborhood show synchronized porch light activity and movement patterns detectable only in low-resolution infrared footage. Thermal imaging logs collected by city inspectors identify uniform heat signatures distributed evenly across all homes, matching the activity cycles noted in security footage. Interior photographs taken during subsequent inspections degrade rapidly, with film and digital files becoming corrupted or incomplete. The final documents of the archive consist of a sealed zoning and containment memorandum from the City Council. This memorandum orders the neighborhood to be quietly rezoned and contained under municipal code, with all civic services maintained without interruption. The directive emphasizes discretion, instructing relevant departments to avoid public disclosure and to continue all record-keeping as normal. No further resident verification is authorized, and all efforts are redirected toward administrative containment rather than physical intervention. Throughout the material, it is evident that the neighborhood remained formally occupied by municipal standards, despite a complete absence of verifiable residents. Property taxes continued to be paid, utility usage remained steady, and school attendance was continually recorded. Yet, no definitive evidence exists within the archive of any individual residing or moving within the neighborhood after the onset of welfare checks. The means by which the neighborhood replaced itself, if indeed that is an accurate description, remains undocumented. It is worthwhile to note that technicians from Vault 13 have recommended limiting cross-referencing this file with population variance events due to the potential for confounding data. The archive's inconsistencies and fragmentary nature suggest a deliberate effort at system continuity, or perhaps an institutional denial that prioritizes operational stability over factual accuracy. As such, Greenfield Estates persists within municipal records as a ghostly presence, active yet empty, accounted for but uninhabited. The layers of documentation resist easy interpretation, and the neighborhood's true state remains obscured beneath an impenetrable veneer of bureaucratic normalcy. The Municipal Zoning Archive, labeled Greenfield Estates Surveillance and Service Records, was recovered from a decommissioned records facility slated for demolition. The facility's cataloging errors and deteriorating physical media complicated initial assessment, but cross-referenced identifiers and timestamps allowed partial reconstruction of the neighborhood's administrative history. The records span roughly 2 decades, beginning in the late 1990s and extending into the early 2010s. Throughout, there is a persistent and growing discordance between the official status of Greenfield Estates as a populated, functioning subdivision and the absence of verifiable residence or community activity. Initial utility service logs are largely unremarkable, showing standard consumption patterns consistent with a modest suburban neighborhood. Water, electricity, and gas meters record daily and seasonal fluctuations matching ordinary residential lifestyles. Service calls and reports note no interruptions or anomalies. For several years, property tax records show timely payments on all parcels within the estate, with no delinquencies or disputes recorded. These financial and infrastructural indicators corroborate each other, reinforcing an official narrative of continuous occupancy and maintenance. This narrative begins to falter when cross-referenced with police welfare check reports initiated in response to citizen concerns about prolonged silence and lack of visible activity. These welfare checks, typically performed by local law enforcement officers, consistently describe homes as meticulously maintained, with yards trimmed and interiors fully furnished. However, officers repeatedly note a complete absence of individuals inside or around the properties. Standard methods of eliciting response, door knocks, calls into the homes, verbal announcements, yield no answer. Vehicles are notably absent from driveways or streets, save for 1 or 2 instances of abandoned cars, which municipal records later identify as belonging to previous owners before the onset of the discrepancy. Despite these absences, welfare check documentation emphasizes a lack of forced entry, break-ins, or signs of neglect or emergency. Appliances and lighting are operational, with heating and cooling systems functioning within normal parameters. Some reports mention audible sounds suggestive of activity, water running, faint noises, but these are never conclusively linked to human presence. Notably, multiple welfare checks over weeks and months span the same properties with identical observations, indicating no change in occupancy status. School district records compound the anomaly. Enrollment lists for Greenfield Estates assign numerous children to nearby elementary and middle schools. Attendance logs reflect consistent presence, and bus pickup routes include stops within the neighborhood. Yet, testimonies from bus drivers and school staff reveal no recollection of children boarding at these stops or attending classes from this area. Parent-teacher communication records sporadically reference unreachable contacts or absent guardians, but these do not result in withdrawals or reassignments. Instead, bureaucratic processes maintain the status quo, with officials noting only procedural irregularities without follow-through. The Homeowners Association minutes, secured from archived municipal filings, trace a gradual shift in communal engagement. Early meeting records discuss typical neighborhood concerns: landscaping, security cameras, social events. Over time, entries increasingly focus on attempts to contact residents who consistently do not answer communications. Discussion of property maintenance reveals a reliance on automated or remotely controlled systems, including synchronized porch light schedules and irrigation timers. Several minutes mention technical difficulties in managing these systems, followed by notes stating remote adjustments restored expected operation. Of particular interest is a memorandum submitted by a city planner during a period of heightened municipal review. This document references a process described as structural exchange, though it provides no explicit definition. The planner's language suggests an alteration or replacement of the neighborhood's occupancy or identity without disrupting civic infrastructure. The memorandum is followed by the planner's abrupt resignation and a marked reduction in detailed city council records addressing Greenfield Estates. Subsequent council meeting notes contain only brief procedural mentions and directives emphasizing operational continuity and limiting external inquiry. Municipal GIS map revisions show subtle but unexplained discrepancies over time. Property boundaries and street numbering occasionally shift without documentation of rezoning or construction. Duplicate parcel identifiers appear in later records, complicating administrative clarity. Neighboring residents, recorded in unrelated municipal surveys and complaint logs, sometimes report seeing figures within Greenfield Estates, yet these figures are described as vague and indistinct, with no consistent identifying features or interactions. Security camera summaries recovered from the neighborhood's surveillance system reveal coordinated activity patterns. Cameras capture porch lights turning on and off in precise synchronization across multiple properties, often at intervals corresponding to typical residential routines. Low-resolution infrared footage shows brief movements consistent with human gestures, but no clear images of occupants. Thermal imaging logs collected during municipal inspections identify uniform heat signatures distributed evenly among homes, exhibiting cyclical patterns aligned with the security footage. Interior photographs taken during these inspections display progressive deterioration in quality and completeness. Some images are partially corrupted or missing, with metadata indicating repeated data errors during retrieval. These photographs show furnished rooms but no occupants, consistent with welfare check reports. Over time, the degrading archival images contribute to a growing ambiguity about the neighborhood's true state. The final set of documents includes a sealed zoning and containment memorandum issued by City Council. This document orders a quiet reclassification of Greenfield Estates, accompanied by instructions to maintain all municipal services without interruption or public disclosure. It directs that further resident verification attempts cease, emphasizing administrative containment through record-keeping rather than physical intervention. Throughout the archive, the neighborhood remains recorded as active and populated. Property taxes continue to be paid on schedule, utility usage remains stable, and school attendance is formally documented, despite the absence of verifiable human presence. The mechanisms enabling this continuity are not detailed in the records, and the precise nature of the replacement, implied by the planner's memorandum, is left unaddressed. Vault 13 technicians have recommended that this file not be cross-referenced with other population variance events to avoid conflating distinct phenomena. The archive's fragmented and contradictory nature seems to reflect an institutional preference for maintaining operational normalcy over confronting factual anomalies. Greenfield Estates persists in municipal records as a neighborhood without occupants, fully integrated into civic systems, yet devoid of verifiable life. The layers of documentation resist straightforward interpretation, presenting a case of enduring bureaucratic presence, coupled with profound physical absence. The progression of municipal records following the initial welfare checks reveals an increasingly tangled web of contradictions and anomalies centered on the Greenfield Estates neighborhood. Utility service logs collected over several years maintain consistent consumption patterns typical of active households. Electricity, water, and gas usage fluctuate within normal daily ranges, adhering to expected seasonal and weekly variations. Importantly, no unexplained drops or spikes correlate with the welfare check timeline, indicating these services remained uninterrupted and regular. However, cross-referencing these logs with physical inspections yields conflicting observations. Police welfare check reports document repeated attempts to establish contact with residents. Early entries note that doors remained locked with no response to knocks or calls, yet the homes appear maintained. Law enforcement notes describe neatly trimmed lawns, functioning exterior lighting, and no visible signs of neglect or abandonment. These reports also consistently remark on the absence of vehicles in driveways or on the street during visits, a detail unusual for a typical residential area of this size and demographic. Interior inspections, when authorized through emergency clauses, find fully furnished homes with appliances powered but no individuals present. Officers report no disturbances, no evidence of forced entry, and no signs of recent habitation such as food preparation remnants or personal belongings in use. The reports sometimes include commentaries on the subtle hum of active electronics, televisions, radios, or computers left on standby, but never detail encounters with occupants. School district records compound the enigma. Enrollment registers for Greenfield Estates list numerous students assigned to nearby schools, with attendance marked as consistent in official logs. Bus route schedules include daily stops within the neighborhood, and transportation logs confirm these stops were made. Yet, bus driver statements uniformly indicate that they never observe children boarding or disembarking at these locations. School staff corroborate this absence, noting no presence of students from the area in classrooms or extracurricular activities. Parent-teacher communications occasionally contain references to unreachable guardians or absent contacts, but these notes do not precipitate removal from attendance rosters or administrative follow-up. Instead, the bureaucratic process continues to register regular attendance data without clear basis. Homeowners Association minutes provide further insight into the evolving situation. Initial records depict standard community concerns, landscaping, neighborhood safety, and communal events. Over time, these minutes increasingly focus on outreach attempts to non-responsive residents. Discussions reveal that many communications, phone calls, letters, emails, go unanswered. Notably, the minutes document a reliance on automated systems to manage property upkeep, remotely controlled irrigation, synchronized porch lighting, and scheduled maintenance services. Several entries note system malfunctions or interruptions, followed by successful remote adjustments, restoring expected operation. One particular meeting references the puzzling synchronization of porch lights, which turn on and off collectively across several properties at nearly identical times each evening. Attempts to identify responsible parties prove fruitless. Concurrently, municipal GIS and mapping records illustrate subtle yet unexplained changes. Over successive revisions, property boundaries, street numbering, and parcel identifiers shift without accompanying documentation or official rezoning procedures. Some parcel identification numbers duplicate, causing confusion in tax records and property assessments. These discrepancies appear in maps from different years, with no clarification or correction noted. Neighboring residents recorded in unrelated municipal surveys and complaint logs intermittently report seeing indistinct figures within Greenfield Estates. Descriptions lack detail and consistency. Witnesses speak of shadows or silhouettes seen through windows or moving briefly across yards, but no one can provide clear identification or direct interaction. These reports are sparse and often dismissed as inconclusive by municipal staff. Security camera summaries recovered from the neighborhood's surveillance network add a layer of complexity. Cameras capture porch lights powering on and off in precise synchronization across multiple homes, often at intervals corresponding to typical evening routines. Infrared footage shows brief, fleeting movements consistent with simple human gestures, hand waves, brief postural shifts, but the resolution is insufficient to confirm identities or detailed activity. Notably, these movements align temporally across several properties, as though coordinated. Thermal imaging logs collected during municipal inspections show uniform heat signatures distributed evenly among homes. These signatures exhibit cyclical patterns matching the timing of security camera activity and porch light synchronization. The heat signatures lack localized variation that would suggest individual presence. Instead, they resemble a homogeneous pattern repeated across the neighborhood. Interior photographs taken during these inspections display progressive degradation in quality and completeness. Early images show furnished rooms with typical household items arranged as expected, yet none contain occupants. Subsequent photographs become increasingly corrupted. Partial images, data errors, missing files. Metadata from these digital records indicates repeated attempts at retrieval and repair, implying either technical failure or intentional obfuscation. The archival degradation deepens ambiguity regarding the true condition of the interiors. A city planner's memorandum emerges in the record during this period, submitted amid growing municipal scrutiny. The text references a process termed structural exchange, though it offers no explicit definition or methodology. The language implies an alteration or replacement of neighborhood identity or occupancy without disrupting civic infrastructure or municipal operations. The planner expresses concern about the implications and calls for cautious examination. Shortly after submission, the planner resigns abruptly from their position. Following this, city council records addressing Greenfield Estates become sparse and procedural. Council meeting notes reduce discussion to brief mentions, accompanied by directives emphasizing the preservation of operational continuity and strict limitation of external inquiry. The final documents in the recovered archive include a sealed zoning and containment memorandum issued by City Council. This memorandum orders a discrete reclassification of Greenfield Estates, accompanied by instructions to maintain all municipal services, utilities, taxes, emergency response, without interruption or public disclosure. It explicitly directs cessation of all further resident verification attempts and prioritizes administrative containment through record-keeping rather than physical intervention. Departments involved in city planning, utilities, education, and law enforcement receive confidential guidance to uphold this status quo. Throughout these records, Greenfield Estates remains formally active and populated within municipal systems. Property taxes continue to be paid on schedule, Utility usage remains steady and consistent with occupied homes, and school attendance is officially recorded. Yet all attempts to confirm the presence or identity of residents fail. The nature and mechanism of the apparent replacement, referenced in the planner's memorandum, remain unelucidated within the archive. The records display a persistent institutional effort to maintain bureaucratic normalcy despite mounting contradictions. Vault 13 technical consultants have recommended limiting cross-referencing this file with other documented population variance events to prevent conflating, potentially unrelated phenomena. The archive's fragmentary, contradictory, and deteriorating nature suggests an intentional maintenance of systemic continuity and concealment. Greenfield Estates endures within municipal records as a neighborhood without verifiable occupants, fully integrated into civic frameworks, yet effectively empty. The materials resist definitive interpretation, leaving an unsettled impression of unresolved, quiet disappearance beneath the guise of routine administration. The final phase of the archive reveals an intensification of contradictions within the municipal records concerning Greenfield Estates. Thermal imaging data from routine inspections, originally intended to confirm occupancy and detect anomalies, consistently show uniform heat signatures distributed evenly across all properties. These readings lack the expected localized variations typical of human presence. No discernible body heat fluctuations, no movement patterns corresponding to individual activity. Instead, the thermal contours resemble a homogeneous thermal field that rises and falls in unison across the entire neighborhood. Cyclical patterns within these data sets correlate closely with the timing of automated porch light schedules and synchronized movements recorded in security footage, reinforcing the notion of coordinated but undifferentiated activity. Security camera logs, as examined in greater detail, present further anomalies. The infrared imagery depicts brief and repetitive gestures, hands raised and lowered, shifts in posture that recur with near-perfect regularity across multiple homes simultaneously. The footage remains low resolution, preventing identification or confirmation of human subjects. Moreover, the movements align with timestamps marking transitions in lighting and irrigation cycles, suggesting pre-programmed behavior or automated mimicry rather than spontaneous human action. Attempts to enhance and clarify these images were repeatedly hindered by file corruption or data loss, as indicated in photographic metadata and recovery logs. Interior photographs collected during welfare checks and municipal inspections offer additional layers of uncertainty. Early images depict well-furnished rooms, complete with personal effects, furniture arrangements consistent with typical suburban life, and no visible occupants. However, as inspections continue, the photographic records degrade markedly. Images become partially corrupted, some files are entirely missing, and metadata logs show multiple retrieval errors and reconstruction attempts. The degradation patterns suggest either technical failures in archiving or potential intentional obfuscation within the digital storage systems. No subsequent imagery contradicts the initial absence of occupants, and no new interior documentation appears after the final inspection cycle. Among the most striking documents is a sealed memorandum from the City Council concerning the reclassification and containment of Greenfield Estates. This document orders a discreet rezoning of the neighborhood, removing it from public maps while maintaining all municipal services, including utilities, property tax collection, emergency response, and school enrollment. The memorandum explicitly instructs cessation of all direct resident verification efforts. It emphasizes administrative containment via record-keeping continuity rather than physical enforcement or intervention. The language underscores an institutional preference for preserving procedural normalcy and minimizing external scrutiny. Distribution of this memorandum was limited to select departments: city planning, utilities, law enforcement, and education, accompanied by directives to uphold the neighborhood's operational facade. The archive also includes fragments of City Council session transcripts during this period. These passages reveal terse discussions, notably lacking detailed deliberation, with an emphasis on maintaining uninterrupted municipal functions despite unresolved anomalies. References to minimizing disruption and ensuring systemic stability appear consistently. Attempts by some council members to probe deeper are met with reminders of confidentiality and the necessity of discretion. The overall tone is one of cautious administrative containment rather than transparent investigation. Throughout these documents, the presence of Greenfield Estates as an active neighborhood persists. Property tax records show regular payments with no reported delinquencies or ownership changes. Utility service logs indicate stable consumption patterns consistent with multiple households. School attendance records continue to list enrolled students as present, with no withdrawals or transfers recorded. Emergency response logs lack any entries indicating direct contact or welfare concerns beyond standard patrols and routine wellness checks. Local law enforcement reports note the absence of residents during welfare visits, but do not escalate these findings. Instead, subsequent reports emphasize verified property security and system integrity. Notably, discrepancies in property identification numbering and municipal mapping endure. Duplicate parcel numbers remain unresolved, and street numbering shifts subtly between revisions without official explanation. These anomalies complicate administrative clarity, but do not trigger formal audits or corrections. Attempts to reconcile these inconsistencies within the archive were either incomplete or deliberately limited, as indicated by redacted or missing internal communications. Neighboring residents' testimonies, recorded sporadically in unrelated municipal surveys and complaint logs, continue to describe vague, indistinct figures seen within Greenfield Estates. However, these accounts offer no consistent descriptions or verifiable interactions. Municipal responses to such reports are minimal, often concluding with dismissals of anecdotal nature or attributing observations to lighting or weather conditions. The collected records also document an absence of any recorded ingress or egress of individuals within Greenfield Estates following the initial welfare checks. No traffic logs, transit records, or security reports indicate movement of residents or visitors. Bus route schedules include the neighborhood, and school attendance remains formally acknowledged, yet no verifiable passenger or student presence is documented. Parent-teacher communication logs frequently mention unreachable contacts or unresponsive guardians, yet no formal action to remove students is undertaken. Efforts to cross-reference these records with other known population variance events within the Vault 13 archives were expressly discouraged by technical consultants associated with the municipal archives recovery. This directive appears intended to prevent conflation of Greenfield Estates' unique anomaly with other phenomena exhibiting superficially similar traits but differing in mechanism and outcome. The archive's fragmented and contradictory nature suggests an institutional strategy favoring systemic continuity and concealment over comprehensive disclosure. Ultimately, Greenfield Estates remains recorded as a functioning neighborhood, fully integrated into civic systems, yet devoid of confirmed human residents. The layers of documentation resist definitive interpretation, presenting an unresolved case of bureaucratic persistence in the face of physical absence. No records clarify the mechanism or nature of the structural exchange referenced in earlier documents, nor do they illuminate what, if anything, replaced the original occupants. The materials conclude without indication of formal closure or resolution. The neighborhood endures within municipal records, its presence maintained by overlapping administrative systems that continue to operate smoothly despite profound empirical contradictions. The archive ends with a sustained silence, an institutional holding pattern where the neighborhood's replacement, whatever form it has taken, remains unspoken, unexamined, and unresolved. The final tranche of records recovered from the Greenfield Estates Municipal Archive consists primarily of late-stage utility service logs, emergency dispatch reports, and school district attendance summaries extending into the early 2010s. These documents reveal a continued pattern of routine operation with no significant deviation in consumption or activity levels, despite persistent, unresolved questions about resident presence. Utility logs for electricity, water, and gas maintain consistent readings aligned with occupation of all properties. Peak usage hours correspond to typical residential schedules, morning preparation and evening return, but no service calls or meter inspections record direct human contact. Attempts to correlate meter reader reports with physical observations show repeated notation of no contact or no response at all addresses, yet no service interruptions or flags for abnormal consumption. Emergency call center transcripts introduce a further layer of ambiguity. A series of 911 reports from local callers describe anomalies such as lights turning on and off in synchronized patterns, the distant sounds of voices or children laughing without apparent source, and occasional sightings of figures glimpsed briefly near windows or doorways. The recordings often end abruptly or with operators noting unable to verify or incident resolved. No units dispatched. Follow-up logs document welfare checks by patrol units, who uniformly find homes locked, furnished, and undisturbed but entirely unoccupied. Officers' field notes consistently reflect uncertainty and sometimes cautious discomfort, but no escalation occurs. School district attendance records compiled during this period continue to list enrolled students as present in classroom rosters. However, cross-referencing with teacher logs and parent contact records reveals a pattern of unreturned communications and unexplained absences from school events or parent-teacher meetings. Despite this, official attendance remains recorded as compliant, with no interventions or withdrawals documented. The administrative insistence on maintaining normal enrollment status appears coordinated with municipal directives. Security camera footage summaries from this phase emphasize ongoing synchronized activity across properties. Porch lights and interior lamps activate and dim in concert, sometimes timed to exact minutes across multiple homes. Infrared recordings register fleeting movements consistent with human gestures, but lack the resolution to confirm persons or identify details. Notably, no footage captures clear entry or exit from the residences, and no vehicles are observed arriving or departing. Motion sensor logs reinforce this pattern of uniform, repetitive activity devoid of individual variation. Municipal Maps and Geographic Information System (GIS) files cataloging Greenfield Estates show continued inconsistencies. Parcel boundaries and street numbers shift subtly between annual revisions, with some lots duplicating identifiers or vanishing entirely from certain datasets. Notations referencing internal reclassification or administrative realignment appear without accompanying explanation or formal records of zoning hearings. Attempts at reconciling these changes within city planning departments appear incomplete or were ceased, as relevant documents are heavily redacted or missing. An internal memorandum from the City Planning Office, dated shortly before the archive's terminus, reiterates the necessity of maintaining structural continuity and systemic stability in Greenfield Estates. It emphasizes avoidance of direct resident contact and prioritizes preservation of operational records. The document uses terms analogous to those in the previously noted structural exchange, but offers no further elucidation. It cautions staff against speculative inquiry and underscores the importance of administrative containment measures. No records indicate formal closure or redeployment of municipal services. Property tax ledgers continue to list Greenfield Estates parcels as active, with payments processed on schedule and no recorded ownership changes. Law enforcement logs show only routine patrols and welfare checks. No reports of disturbances or security breaches appear. Education department files maintain student rosters without alteration. Utility companies record stable accounts and consistent usage metrics. Neighboring community records and unrelated municipal surveys sporadically include vague mentions of Greenfield Estates residence or activity. However, these references lack substance or verification, often repeating previously documented descriptions of indistinct figures or inexplicable light patterns. Local law enforcement and service providers treat such reports as anecdotal without initiating investigation or follow-up. The archive concludes with no indication of resolution or explanation for the neighborhood's persistent but unverifiable occupancy. The absence of any documented ingress or egress, combined with ongoing synchronized environmental activity and administrative continuity, leaves the phenomenon unresolved. The mechanisms by which Greenfield Estates replaced its residents, or whether a replacement occurred in any conventional sense, remain undocumented and unaddressed. Vault 13 consultants continue to advise against cross-referencing this case with other population anomalies to avoid conflating distinct phenomena. The documentation suggests a deliberate institutional posture favoring procedural normalcy and containment, even in the face of mounting empirical contradictions. Greenfield Estates endures in the records as a functioning neighborhood without verifiable inhabitants. The archival silence surrounding its replacement is maintained through overlapping bureaucratic systems, preserving an uneasy status quo. The materials cease without closure, leaving only the persistent presence of a neighborhood that, by all measurable accounts, exists without its people. This concludes the recovered file. May future listeners take caution in its implications. The Archivist, Vault 13.